Hey, what's up everybody? It is Kellen here from Start Your Systems, and welcome to another MX vs ATV Supercross Encore gameplay video. Today, I'm going to play Sous Les Ponts, and I'm going to do a ton of laps, and I'm going to do it on all time. And the purpose of doing this nice long video today, I'm not going to do that many laps in the video. I'm just going to do as many laps as it takes for me to actually talk about all these thoughts and opinions running through my mind. But today I'm going to talk about who the USA should perhaps pick to race for the United States at the 2017 Motocross Nations in Great Britain this year. Now, on the face value of what I'm talking about, you think, it should be a rather easy pick of who you should go for, given that Eli Tomac has destroyed everybody this year. Well, not destroyed, but been one of the guys that is destroying everybody in the 450 class this year. And either Zach Osborne or Jason Anderson would be pretty good secondary 450 guy picks, and Zach Osborne, likely to win the 250 championship, would be the 250 pick because there's an MX1 class, aka the 450 class, an MX2 class, aka the 250 class, an MX2 class, aka the 250 class, and an MX Open class, aka whatever bike you want to run that's 450 cc's or less class at the Motocross Nations. So you'd usually send two 450 riders and a 250 rider. So it would be either Tomac, Baggett Anderson in the 450s, and probably Zach Osborne in the 250s, right? Well, wrong. As we have discovered this past weekend after Washougal, Eli Tomac, for the second year in a row, is pretty much openly stating that he will decline the opportunity to race at the 2017 Motocross Nations for the USA. And there's a myriad number of reasons for that, but let's start talking about, well, let me see. How do I want to phrase this first? Tomac isn't going basically for a couple reasons, and that's how I'm going to start it. He is not going to race the Motocross Nations because he has to fill out a couple obligations, primarily for Monster Energy, that Monster puts in his contract, and that elicits too many races in a year for Tomac to do. Therefore, he's going to have to race the GP of the USA at WW Ranch in Florida the week, 2 weeks or the week or 2 weeks after Nationals end in the United States. So that's one. And the second is that because he is a monster athlete, he is the defending champion of the race. All different reasons. He's obviously going to have to race the Monster Energy Cup, which happens on October 16th to 18th, somewhere in that range this year. And the reason that this is a problem for Tomac is that the Motocross Nations falls on October 1st this year in Great Britain. So he'd be across the pond basically 2 weeks before he needed to be ready to race Monster Cup. And that's a little bit of a tough scenario to put Eli in for his sake, because they want him to come out firing at Monster Cup and make Monster look good and maybe win a Monster Million as a Monster athlete and Monster. But Monster, basically obligates that he has to ride these races. They can put it in his contract because they are races that exist on the calendar, whereas Motocross Nations is a race that exists on the calendar, but there's no guarantee Eli will be picked for that race every year, so they can't stipulate that in the contract that he is required to race that race because, maybe he's not even picked. And Tomac basically gives a reason that the season is a long grind. He's been racing, this is going to be 29 races deep after Nationals are over. He's been racing pretty much every weekend, barring 5 or 6 weekends for the past 9 months past 8 months by the time Nationals is over. So you can understand him a little bit from the aspect that he's kind of worn down. He still has 2 more races to go after that. He doesn't want to add another one in that's probably going to be the most taxing, since he has to put in a lot of work to do, get prepared for the race and then fly across the Atlantic and train in Great Britain and then go out and race pretty much the biggest race that exists in motocross, with a lot of pressure on his shoulders to do well for the United States. And so this is all the reasons pretty much why he didn't go last year and why I assume he is electing not to go again this year. This was basically confirmed when Jimmy Albertson asked him if he had thought about going, and Tomac said that it's pretty unlikely that he is to go. He did not flat out say, I am not going, from what I gather, but if that's the case and he says it's pretty unlikely that he's going, he's probably not going. He's pretty much already made it in his mind that he doesn't want to. So if he doesn't want to, why should they put him on the track? So then you go to the next person, Baggett Anderson. Where are they at? Well, Baggett had his wrist injury at Redbud when him and Anderson came together that he will require surgery on, and is planning to get that fixed pretty much as soon as Nationals are over to probably get ready for Monster Cup, or at least be 100% healthy for 2018 Supercross. He will not be available. He will be recovering, or at least not 100% ready to go, so they will probably not pick him, and I assume he doesn't really want to be picked, just because if he was, he probably wouldn't get surgery that he needs, etc., etc. Jason Anderson would be the next pick, or the next pick before Baggett, but he's on that same level. Anderson is confirmed by Steve Mathis of PulpMX that he will also not be attending the Motocross of Nations because he has a plate in his foot from an injury that he sustained, I think even last year before Supercross started, and he needs to get that surgically removed, and it needs to heal, and he's just not going to have any time to prepare for that, and Monster Cup, and etc., etc., etc. So no Anderson. All right, well, we're down to the more or less like second/third tier guys on 450s, and that includes but is not limited to guys like Cole Seeley, Justin Barcia, Cooper Webb. You could maybe throw Weston Pike into that group, and I just think that in general the two best of those four guys would be Webb and Barcia, since they have both raced at the Motocross of Nations before. But we saw Justin Barcia have a gigantic off this past weekend at Washougal. Only got a concussion. I say only because that's kind of a bad injury, but he will be like healthy and ready to go for Unadilla in a week and a half now. So you could see physically he might be ready to go for Motocross of Nations. However, Justin Barcia's contract is up at JGR on October 1st, aka the day that the Motocross of Nations happens this year. And it is looking less and less likely that JGR will re-sign Justin Barcia. And if that's the case, then they don't really have any obligations to support him for that race. And I mean, why would they if, maybe one last hurrah, but then they'd have to sign him for like a couple-day contract if that's the case. So I would assume that's not what they want to do. If Barcia is going to come back to JGR, and that seems like it's going to happen, and they want him to get picked for this race, then I could very likely see Justin Barcia actually getting picked, because I know he likes to go. He's always up to the task to representing the United States whenever he's been asked, pretty much. So I could see it for sure. But I don't think that that's going to be the case. I think JGR is going to go a different route next year. No idea exactly what. I could probably hint at it, but I'm not going to. So I see Barcia not going, and that leaves us down to possibly Webb going, maybe Seeley, maybe Pike. And yeah, maybe they could get picked, but at this point we're getting down to the guys that really would not go there expecting to win the classification nation race for the USA. Webb could do very well on a 450, but he hasn't done fantastic this year, and it is seeming less likely that he would get picked, even though he is supposed to be back from his meniscus surgery at Unadilla. Who knows how healthy he will be 100% by that point. Of course, he will still have almost 2 months to prepare once he's finally back on the bike and ready to go, if they do choose to pick him. But again, I don't know if I see them picking him with him coming off that injury, and him also not necessarily 100% interested in going, as he mentioned on RacerX Online earlier today. Just kind of said the GPs, or primarily Ustream, the promoters of the event, have left a sour taste in his mouth because of changing the venue from Glen Helen this year back to Matterley Basin for the Motocross of Nations, and just a whole gamut of other things that he said. I'll link the article in the description below. But if Webb's not going, then what do we do? Seeley and Pike on 450s and Osborne on the 250s. Osborne has openly stated that he will go and race the Motocross of the Nations if selected. He would love to be selected, and he badly wants to go. So Osborne's in on the 250, at least on the 250, maybe a 450 if they really need him. But there's a lot of things up in the air. And before I get into who I think maybe would be a good pick and really talk about what that could mean for the USA at Matterley Basin, I'm going to talk about how we got to this whole scenario of riders not wanting to compete necessarily for the United States, and why we are where we are. And I'll start with the bad for the USA to kind of try to make sense of this whole thing. I fall on the side of, I think that, you know, no matter what the schedule's looking like, no matter what the pay's like, etc., you gotta go and represent the United States. Like that's the biggest calling you're ever gonna have in this sport. If you win the Motocross of Nations, you are enshrined forever, and pretty much everybody that Tomac is lining up against in the big bike class anymore that would take take him on for moto victories, race wins, etc., has won the Motocross of Nations before. Marvin Musquin has won the Motocross of Nations before. Ken Roxon has won the Motocross of Nations before. Ryan Dungey before this has won the Motocross of Nations before, but Eli Tomac has not. So, you know, you kind of are in an elite group if you do end up winning it with your country, and it's very hard to do, very challenging. So I'll just start by saying that, but I will go into the bad and what makes this difficult for the USA. First of all, I'll talk about probably the most important aspect of all this, and it is the scheduling of the Motocross of Nations, which is kind of tough this year, honestly. If it was maybe moved up a couple weeks, I could see it being a lot easier for the USA, but given that the Nationals end before the end of August, and the race isn't until the beginning of October, that's pretty much over a month that they have to continue training, continue riding, get themselves prepared. And in a way, that's a good thing, because then they're almost completely ready to go when it comes time for the Motocross of Nations, and they're not behind on testing in Great Britain and stuff. But the bad thing is that it's like slinging up right behind it, which I already talked a little bit about at the beginning of the video, is Monster Cup. Only a couple weeks after that, and although it's not a true Supercross race, it does have a lot more Supercross than Motocross qualities. Guys need to test Supercross suspension and be pretty much race ready for that. So, and most of the time, riders in the USA these days, I think, value the Monster Cup than they do the Motocross of Nations. I guess maybe because they could win $1 million, but I think it's kind of stupid that they do that. Either way, that scheduling conflict is really a big deal, because, you know, win or lose a Motocross of Nations, if you fly back from Great Britain the next day, you've got less than 2 weeks to pump out Supercross suspensions and get your training program back on track, Supercross-wise, to go out and do 3 10-lap main events at the Monster Cup. So I can see scheduling-wise why it is definitely a challenge for the USA, and it's not a challenge that they necessarily have ran into, at least recently, given that the Motocross of Nations hasn't been in October since 2003. I think that's the last time it was in October, and while it is only the 1st of October, it still, you know, means that it's later in the year than it has been in the last 14 years. Last year, I believe it was September 27th and 28th were the days that the race was on. And then even before that, it was as early as September 16th, September 15th, a couple of years ago. So, you know, if the Nationals are ending in August and the race is in middle-ish September, it makes it a lot easier for the USA to get to. So I can get that scheduling-wise why it is tough. And I can kind of understand where Tomac's coming from, where he's going to have a whole extra month of testing that he doesn't want to have to go through, despite, you know, he is going to race the GP, but it's pretty quickly after the Nationals are over, so it's like still just kind of coming off of that, you know, training for outdoors regiment that he's been on. So I can get that a little bit. The other kind of conflict of interest that's come up a lot this week about the discussion for the Motocross of Nations is how it is in Europe quite often. It has been in Europe for the last, it's going to go on 7 years it's been in Europe every year. And it was going to be in the USA this year. It's going to be in the USA next year, most likely. But, you know, when it is in Europe, it does force the USA to travel across the pond. They can't drive there. They can't take their semis there, all that stuff. So they have to ship all their bikes, ship all their suspension, ship all their gear, ship their riders, ship their personnel. All of it across the Atlantic Ocean to Europe, and you know, that's a cost. That's a big cost for sure, and I understand that aspect as well, that it's not cheap for the USA. But this is also where I start to hit a little bit of a, really, you're going to make a complaint about that? Because yes, the Ustream company that runs MXGPs, that hosts the FIM Motocross of Nations, does get some money, you know, hauled in from this whole event, and you would think that they could maybe spread it out a little bit, and they do. They give the USA, I think it's 2,000 plus euros for travel expenses and X amount of dollars for extraneous fees, either food or whatever. I don't know the exact numbers. I just know that they give them some, not a lot, but some money to help them accomplish what they need to get done, and it goes to every country. So it's like a fair policy. Like every country gets a little bit. But what makes it unfair, at least from the USA standpoint, is that not all, but most of these other countries already reside in Europe, compete in the MXGPs, kind of know the drill. They only have to drive their semis to the races, and yeah, you can kind of make sense of that, but I'm going to offer my counter opinions on that in a second. So basically, money-wise, it's a problem for USA, apparently, and, you know, issues, problems, whatever. The other thing that kind of comes with all this is the repetitive grind that the USA riders go through. As Tomac has mentioned, he's been, you know, riding, racing, training, etc. for 8 months, but it starts a whole month before that with Supercross testing, so 9 months really straight. They don't get much of an off-season anyway. That was kind of things that Dungey and Villopoto complained about before retiring. So they are constantly grinding out. They don't usually get much rest for a summer break, or for summer or for winter break, really. So, you know, it is a big ask, a big test to have these guys go when they've been riding so hard, so long, all season long. And that is pretty much where I get Eli Tomac's point of view. That's where it stops, though. Beyond that, I am pretty firmly on the side of, if you're an American rider and you are asked to race for the United States in the Motocross Nations and you openly turn that offer down, you are starting to shoot yourself in the foot pretty big time there, mister. Not too many big-time legends of the sports turned it down. Ricky Carmichael was famously one of them who did turn down an opportunity to ride at the Motocross Nations, so there's that. However, he did most of the time answer the call, and you can kind of respect him for that, and for the most part, I respect a lot of these other guys for how many times they did end up racing the Motocross Nations. Obviously, it's a different story because they're winning so often and the USA is getting their butts kicked every year at the moment. But they still showed up every year, you know. They still went out, they still tried, and I don't fall on the side of, yeah, all these excuses make it perfectly okay for Tomac and the likes of Dungey, who did it a couple years in a row as well, to say, nope, you know what, it's too much, can't do it. The first year Dungey did it, I kind of accepted it because he did it for 6 years in a row. The second year that he did it, I was like, okay, now you've kind of overstayed your welcome. And now Tomac has again done it 2 years in a row, where he probably would have been picked, or has gotten the call about getting picked for this race, and he declined, or is going to decline at least. So I don't like that decision. From a fan's sake, obviously it sucks because it means that the best rider in the USA likely won't end up on the track against the best riders in Europe and or around the world. But that's kind of where the bad ends, you know. Like, for the most part, this is a fantastic race. It's the biggest event of the year. It's a sponsor's dream if your rider makes it, because then suddenly you have the Stars and Stripes plastered with all your logos on it, and I just, for the sponsors, I feel like it's just everything they want about this sport, which is several fans showing up. All the fans across the world are suddenly paying attention to this race just this weekend. You know, nobody cares about the GPs in the USA, it seems like, but the few fans that do know that most American fans only watch it when it is the Motocross of Nations. And I'm sure that there's a lot of fans in Europe that don't care to watch the American series that often, maybe highlights here and there. But when the Americans come to race the Motocross of Nations, you better believe they are out there, they are watching, and they are enjoying the fact that they get to see the American riders at least for that one time a year. So, I mean, it still is, in my opinion, the biggest race of the year for these guys. It's, if you make it, it should be an honor. It should be something that you feel like you worked really hard for. And Zach Osborne, when he was, you know, being interviewed by Steve Mathis about what making the Motocross of Nations like team would mean to him, he basically said that he told Alden Baker's trainer, who for some reason likes to tell his guys that racing the Motocross of Nations is ridiculous and you shouldn't do it, that he wanted by the end of the year to be on the Motocross of Nations team. And Alden said, like, well, let's focus on, you know, nationals and all this stuff like that. And Zach said, hey, Alden, if I'm making the team for the Motocross of Nations, it means that I probably did something pretty damn good all year long to make the team, and I didn't just luck into it. So let's focus on making it to the Motocross of Nations by being the best I can freaking be, so that I'm good enough to be picked and go represent my country. And from what I understand, what Zach said about that was Alden was like, yep, okay, I get it. And that's how it should be. Like, you should really badly want to represent your country, because it is one of the few times that you get to say that in this sport. You get to don the red, white, and blue. You get to go out there and get cheered on by several different fans, and have a whole nation of fans behind you for that one weekend, and all the eyes of the world of motocross just firmly planted on you and that team. So I just think that realistically, if you choose to not go, it does hurt your persona a little bit. It does hurt your career in an aspect that says, like, yes, he was asked to go and he said no. And if Tomac never wins, which I think he will, but if he never wins a Motocross of Nations, like, he is in, you know, some kind of bad company there. Like, Dungey's won it, Villapoto's won it, McGrath won it even, maybe he didn't, but you know, Ricky won it, and all these other legends from before. Jeff Stanton, Johnny O'Mara, David Bailey, Rick Johnson, Jeff Ward, all of these legends of the 80s, of the 70s, they represented and they won for the USA. And if Tomac never gets that, then that's just going to be sad for him, because he probably is one of, if not the best rider in the world right now. And he's not going to be able to show that against the other best riders in the world. And I just think that kind of sucks, and it kind of leaves a little bit of a mark, at least on this season, but maybe his career at some point if he never does get a chance to win this race with his country. So I think that's kind of, you know, that's kind of crap. Like, I'm not trying to crap on Tomac too much about it, but like, at some point he's just got to kind of swallow his pride, if that's what you want to call it, and say, like, look, I have to go, you know, if I'm picked to represent my country, like, I should go. Like, that's what all these legends of the sport did before me. I know that the schedule's long, but his training regimen is fantastic. He's in great shape. I think he could do with like an extra little couple weeks of training in there of motocross to maybe go and win a title for the USA. Because, like, let's say if Tomac went and Osborne went, and we just, you know, pick out of a hat, let's send Barsha. No, okay, let's send Seeley as the open rider. Seeley's good enough to go out there and probably get at least one, if not two, top 10s at the Motocross of Nations. He is that good. He is not, like, so good that you'll see him up front winning races or something like that, at least not in my opinion. But they have a throwaway score. Zach Osborne, riding as well as he is right now, is probably going to be the fastest MX2 rider this year, unless they drop Hurlings back down to the 250 class or something like that. But given the competition he would have to go up against, of the current MX2 riders out there, he is going to smoke them. Like Paul's Jonas, Jeremy Seawer, Benoit Patrell, Thomas Covington, even, who's going to race for Puerto Rico. They're not Zach Osborne's level. That's just cold, hard facts. Sorry to put it that way, GP fans, but that's just the truth. So Osborne would be the best 250 guy there, and Tomac would be one of the best, if not the best 450 guy there. He would be at least on par with like Hurlings and Geyser, and really close, if not better than what Cairoli's been able to do this year for sure. So you couple that together, and USA probably has a winning team, even though Seeley maybe only musters a 9th one moto and then a 14th the other, and that's a throwaway or something like that. So Tomac not going is a huge blow to the USA's chances of winning, and it sucks. Like, that blows for USA fans, because I'm sure at this point, and I'm in that group, I'm tired of watching the USA lose. Like, I want them to go out there and win this damn thing for 1 year. You know, this might be their 6th straight year losing this thing since 2012, when they lost at Lommel, and they lost again at Germany. They lost again at Kegums in Latvia. Then they lost again in Ernée. And then they lost again last year at Maggiora in Italy. And here we go into Matterley with possibly sending like a C or D grade team of what you would expect of the riders to go. And that kind of sucks for us USA fans, you know. It's a bummer. But getting into who I think could be picked. And there have been a lot of ideas thrown around that solely ends up depending on Who Roger DeCoster decides he's going to send a phone call to, and who actually answers that call and says yes, they will go. It really depends, and who goes, I really can't say, but who I believe should or could go would probably be something along the lines of this. I think that they should take a chance, hope he's going to be healthy, get himself back in gear, and tell him, like, look, I know you're pissed off at Ustream for moving the date. Pissed off at them for moving it out of the USA, pissed off at your season for how it's gone probably, but you've got a factory Yamaha under you next year, and Cooper Webb, you have another chance to redeem yourself after crashing in a position to win the Motocross Nations last year. He badly wants to win this event. I know he does deep down inside, even if he says he doesn't want to go. He so badly wants to win the Motocross Nations because he's a kid that shows up and goes to work and puts in the work, and if it comes down to representing the USA, you bet he's going to be there. And I would say you should pick Cooper Webb to be on that 450 in the MX1 class again this year. I think he'll be healthy enough to do it. I think he will muster up the strength to go out there and do it. And even though Monster wants him to race the GP and the Monster Energy Cup, I think it'll do Webb some confidence boosting if he can go out there and put in a great ride at the Motocross Nations. So I would pick Webb. I'd also pick Osborne to ride a 250F. I don't think moving him up to a 450 is the best idea. He could probably do very well on it, but I think putting Osborne on a 250F where he's comfortable, where he's been the fastest, where he would clearly be the fastest 250F guy out there is your best move. And it's a toss-up between two guys, I think, of who you should, or maybe even three guys of who you should put on the other 450 in the open class. But I'm going to go ahead and just say that you should probably pick Jeremy Martin to take his Geico Honda across the seas and to ride a 450, which he did very well on this year at Daytona. And I know it's not the same thing, but clearly he knows how to ride a 450. And that 450 Honda is balling this year. And Jeremy Martin is a very capable rider, especially outdoors. I would say Seeley, and I know he's 5th in the points, so he's pretty good when it comes to outdoors right now, and he's healthy, and I'm sure he would love to go. But just, I can't get over the fact that Seeley is not, like, if you were going to say what is Cole Seeley's special at Supercross or Motocross, 99 out of 100 people would say, yeah, he's much better at Supercross. And if that's the case, you're sending the wrong guy to the Motocross of Nations. If it was a Supercross of Nations, yeah, sure, go ahead, put Seeley on the team. But if I was Roger DeCoster and I'm making the phone calls right now, that's where I start. I start with calling Cooper Webb and saying, you know, swallow your emotions for right now and get pissed off and throw it all on the track about how Ustream is bent over the USA this year when we get to Great Britain and race on the 450 in the MX1 class. Call Zach Osborne up, and here's how that call is going to go. Zach Osborne, Roger DeCoster is going to pick up the phone and say, "Hey Zach," and Zach's going to go, "Yep." That's it. Zach Osborne seems to be the only guy that really wants to race the Motocross Nations this year. And good on him, dude, because you know what? You should want to represent your country, and especially when you've had a great season like Zach Osborne has had, he deserves to go. And I've heard some media guys say that the USA should not send a team this year. I think that's blasphemy. You should always send a team to the Motocross of Nations. You should probably talk to the Ustream about the ability to change the schedule for next year, so either the race is earlier or something like that. And I'm going to talk another minute here in a second about the USA scheduling and what I think is wrong with it as well. And but yeah, I would call Webb, I would call Zacho, and I would call J-Mart, because other than Zacho, well, you know what? Even Zacho, everybody's raced the Motocross of Nations before on that team. Osborne is the only guy not to race for USA, but he has raced for Puerto Rico, so they have the Motocross of Nations experience. Zach Osborne is probably the most faceted when it comes to Europe of those guys, because he raced in Europe for 4 years, or at least, you know, in the MXGP World Championship for 4 years. So I mean, that's where I would start. Yes, you could maybe talk about putting Plessinger on a 450 instead of Webb, because Plessinger's healthy. He'd probably be fantastic on a 450. You could maybe even say put him on a 450 over J-Mart, but J-Mart is supposed to ride a 450 next year, and we've seen in the past guys ride 450s when they're supposed to the following year anyway, a la Dungey in 2009 at Franciacorta. So I think J Mart wouldn't be that bad of a pick, even though it seems like he's not his normal self, but maybe getting him fired up to go race for the USA and put him on a 450 and Stars and Stripes. These guys, you know, they'll come out of their shell a little bit, I think. So that's where I would go. I'd obviously love to hear your guys' picks. This is just completely random, my picks of who I would put on the team. I've seen people going as outrageous as like, oh, get Carmichael and Mike LaRocco and Jeff Stanton to race for the team, because they would never turn down an opportunity to race for the USA. And you know what? They probably wouldn't. But maybe we should pick the guys that are actually on the track racing right now, huh? But yeah, talking about the USA schedule is probably going to be one of the last things I talk about in this video, because I've been super ranting in this one. The USA schedule to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you. I think 17 Supercross races is too much, but you're not going to turn Felder out on that because they think it's the best thing ever and that there should be more Supercross races. And it's pretty hard to say that 12 Nationals is too much, but I also do think it kind of is. I think they could do with a 10 race series instead of 12. And also make it a little bit easier to get back and forth across the country. I like that they take more breaks in the national schedule because it gives the guys a little bit more rest. But it also kind of extends the series out a little bit longer and stuff like that. But my biggest discrepancy with the USA schedule as it stands right now is that everybody that rides a 450 is pretty much... Okay, everybody that rides a 450 that is a regular / somewhat regular main event guy in a Supercross is expected to show up and race the Monster Cup every year. And there's no real rhyme or reason why, because the Monster Cup took over as like the US Open. The US Open used to be in that time slot in Vegas at that time of year, and you could never get everybody in the USA to show up to that. And now it's just like a given thing that everybody in the 450 class is going to show up and race the Monster Cup. Like, it's pretty rare you see guys skip it. And my response to that is, okay, if you're Monster Energy and you have all these guys showing up anyway, and not even if you're Monster Energy, if you have anything to do with scheduling and Supercross and all this stuff, why in the hell do you put that race in October? I mean, it's already in the middle of UNLV's football season, so you have to schedule it around the football season anyway. But October, like, you are dead central in the middle of the off season for the USA guys. If it's the last weekend of October, it is literally in the exact middle of the off season, because the off season starts at the end of August and ends at the beginning of January. So it's a 4-month span, and the end of October is smack dab in the middle of it. So almost the end of October, which it is right now, is pretty damn close to smack dab in the middle of the off season for these guys. And I really just don't get it. Like, why not run the race in December 20th, you know, a few days before Christmas? Those guys are already in full-blown Supercross training mode anyway. It's the last little dealio that you can run before everybody takes their little Christmas break. They used to have Supercross races in Canada and Holland and all this other crap before Christmas break anyway. So why not run the Monster Energy Cup middle of December, and also maybe even count it as a Supercross race? Like, let the scores count. It gets everybody to show up. It's, you know, a unique one-off event. It's almost like the Daytona 500 for NASCAR, where like there's 1,000 different things going on at that event, but in the reality of the situation, it is still a NASCAR race that starts the season. Why not have the Monster Energy Cup be a Supercross race that starts the Supercross season? And they take a couple weeks off, and then they're back in Anaheim again. Like, to me, there is no real good explanation to why the Monster Energy Cup has to be in October. You're never going to explain it to me why it should be. I don't care if there's no good reason for it to be in December either. I don't care if there's no good reason to have it at all. Why in the middle of October though? Like, it seems like it's almost like a little desperate plea for, you know, Monster Energy, Feld, Fox Sports, and everything like that to have just something to do in the middle of October. Like, just move it, you know? Like, let these guys have an off season, let them get their Supercross training started whenever they want, and have the Monster Energy Cup in December, and then we don't run into this problem. Like, yeah, these guys still have to race an extra month to be able to race the Motocross the Nations, but as soon as the Motocross the Nations are over, then bam, they get 3 months off basically to get ready and train for the Monster Cup if they want, or to go race any other off-season races they want in, you know, Paris or Australia or Geneva or Italy or Germany or whatever the heck they want to do. But at least they get an off season if they want it. Because right now it's like, oh yeah, nationals are over. That's all fine and dandy. Oh, but let's go right back into Supercross testing because here comes the Monster Cup, and Monster Cup has happened. All right, let's take a week off, and we're right back into Supercross testing because we only have 2 months before January, and the Supercross season starts. Like, the Monster Cup is a cool race and all that jazz and whatever, but it just frustrates me every year the timing that it is, because it doesn't make a lick of sense to me for a full season of racing for these guys. It's just like, it'd be like in baseball putting the All-Star game that is mandatory to show up for all these players in January. You know, their season normally ends in right before November. That's when the World Series is ending slash did end already. And then you put the All-Star game in January, and then they come back to spring training in March. It's like all these guys are at home with their families and all this stuff like that. Why are you just going to throw something just smack dab in the middle of the off-season? I just don't get it. So anyway, this is pretty much me just ranting about the Motocross Nations. There's a lot of things that I said in there that you guys are probably going to flame on about, and that's all fine and dandy, but that's just my honest opinions. Like, I feel like these guys, if you're going to show up to a race, it better damn well be the Motocross Nations, because every motocross racer that came before you, their dream, their aspiration, and sometimes their goal and eventually their achievement was going to the Motocross Nations and winning for their country. And if you're just going to say, nah, I'm good, you look like an idiot to all these guys. Like, Jeff Stanton has already made Tomac look like an idiot on Twitter by saying, like, whatever happened to representing your country? Like, I never did this, blah, 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 blah. And then Denny Stevenson, who was a 125 Supercross champion back in the day, he laid into Tomac on Instagram. He's like, man, you had it all made, dude. Like, you were winning the championship, you were looking great, you had all these fans behind you from Supercross and stuff like that, and then you decide to pull the, nah, I'm good, I don't want to go to Motocross the Nations crap. And Stevenson just like laid into him, like said, like, I'm not a fan of it, I'm not a fan of your decision, I think a lot of other people are not a fan of your decision. And you know what, I know there's a lot of Tomac fans out there, and I'm probably pissing you off to no end because I keep talking about Tomac negatively in this video, but like, you're not going to get me to support that decision. Like, he should go. And yes, maybe the MXGP series needs to make a couple changes, move the series up a little bit, but I mean, you're asking them to do things that they haven't ever done before when it comes to like completely restructuring their schedule just around the American series. Like, that in the past, yes, the Motocross Nations has happened before the GP season is over, but that was already pre-planned, and it wasn't like, oh, we have to have the Americans in it. And to suggest that yes, the Americans are a big draw to the Motocross Nations, but to suggest that they're the only draw and like that you need to pay big dollars to get them over is just flawed, and all it's going to do is make it look like you're an idiot, because if you give 50,000 euros to the United States, and probably you should to Australia and Canada and New Zealand and all these other, Japan and all these other countries that come from not in Europe to race the Motocross the Nations so that they can make it comfortably to the Motocross the Nations, then you know what? As soon as the Motocross the Nations are in the USA next year, MX Sports / the AMA / whoever the hell should be paying $50,000 to every team that's coming from across this pond, because that's exactly the precedent you just set, is that, oh, it's so hard for the USA every year to send a team because they have to cross the pond, and we need to pay for their travel expenses, blah, 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 blah. Well, then that means that, all right, Italy, Belgium, Holland, Germany, Great Britain, all these teams that have fantastic riders that would make the Motocross the Nations in the United States next year fantastically more interesting than if they didn't show up. If you're going to pay 50,000 euros to the USA to have them come to Europe, then you better, reciprocate that dollar amount in US dollars, or just pay them 50,000 euros to all these countries when they come over too. Like, there's no real logical argument for saying, oh, the USA is the biggest, most fantastic draw of the event, so obviously we should forget about Canada, forget about Australia, forget about New Zealand, forget about all these other countries that are sending riders every year. Yep, let's just pay USA a ton of money so that they can show up. Nope. If you want raw, real motocross, they're going to have to pay their way in just like everybody else. It's just the cold, hard facts, ladies and gentlefish. But anyway, I mean, I've ranted on for a long time. I really didn't think I'd take all of the 28 laps up on this, but I got pretty damn close, and I feel like I hit on some pretty important topics there. I talked for 40 freaking minutes, so or close to it. But I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and opinions. I mean, this is basically a podcast of me talking about my opinions of what's going to happen this year. Like, I told you what I think the team might be. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on Tomac openly saying that I'm healthy, I could go, but I'm not going to. And what that means for the USA and why our sport has reached this level, that the Motocross the Nations means so little to these guys, and what maybe you think of Monster Energy kind of requiring Tomac to race these races that maybe if he didn't have to race them, he might still go. Monster Cup is probably a given, but maybe if he didn't have to race the USGP, WW, he might go, because that was kind of a given reason for why he didn't go last year when he had to race Charlotte and Glen Helen. Yeah, just everything that I touched on, go ahead, voice your thoughts and opinions. I will be sure to get back to you with my responses to those and tell you whether I agree or disagree with what you're saying and why I do or don't agree with that. But I guess I'm more just kind of like a pissed off American that likes, I love the Motocross the Nations. I want it to be the biggest event for the Americans and everybody to want to go, but it just is becoming less and less like that, and it's so frustrating that nobody views it, or these riders don't view it the same way as some of us fans do. Like, I want them to go, I want them to win, of course, because I am an American and I want to root for them. But if they send Seeley, Pike, and Osborne, it's going to be pretty hard for that team to win. Like, that would be like an Ultra B team, and if they won, it would be like almost a miracle. No offense to them, but damn, they are going up against some serious world-class talent this year, and almost everybody in Europe is healthy. There's not too many guys that are like very much out with injury. Geyser's back. Hurlings is looking good. Cairoli is an animal this year. Bobrashev's okay for the Russians. And you got Noggle. Like, the only real big missing piece of the European teams would be Ken Roczen. And, I mean, he's out because of what happened here instead of getting injured while racing the GPs over there. So I'm kind of mad that we don't get to see the Battle Royale that we probably should have been able to see. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and maybe you sat all the way through it. And if you did, congratulations, because it was a long video, and I'm really proud of you for sitting through this whole thing. Hopefully you had some milk and cookies to enjoy along the way. But anyway, for Kellen here on Starter Systems, I'm going to wrap this video up. Thanks for watching another MX vs. ATV Supercross Encore gameplay, Sous Le Pont National Track. And I hope to see you guys in our future videos. Bye-bye.